The Electronic Frontier Foundation began as an organization to help lawmakers and police and other enforcement agencies understand computers, understand the internet, understand digital media and digital communications. This was a very, very worthwhile endeavor because if any of you remember the 1980s and 90s, nobody seemed to understand what computers or modems or the internet or any sort of digital thing was. All the lawmakers and news pundits, they were utterly and completely clueless, and they needed someone to hold their hand and make them understand how things worked. That was the whole purpose of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, a purpose that was extremely useful. Like, it was necessary. It needed to exist in order to help people actually make laws that made sense, to enforce laws in ways that weren't completely clueless about the basics of computing. It was needed. But over the last few years, the EFF has begun advocating for and against laws that kind of make me scratch my head a little bit. Over the last few years, they've focused on things like net neutrality legislation. And at first glance, that makes a certain level of sense. Net neutrality is the idea that all bandwidth on the internet is created equal and can't be throttled based on the content or the people trying to access it, right? It's a very simple idea. The EFF stance on net neutrality, however, was less simple and far more crazy. Their stance was literally that if net neutrality legislation did not get passed, the internet would cease to exist. People would not be able to get access to the internet. Their free speech would be stifled at every turn. The entire economy would come crashing down. It was an end of the world scenario. Of course, there have been times where we've had net neutrality rules and regulations and times where those same net neutrality rules were repealed and nothing really happened. Almost nobody noticed anything happening at all. But the EFF focused on how it would destroy everything. And they've done this time and time again with the Earn It Act and the COSA Act. The COSA Act was about the Kids Online Safety Act, right? It was focused on basically keeping kids from seeing certain types of material on the internet. And the Earn It Act was a modification of Section 230, which was for digital publishers and whatnot. And neither of those pieces of legislation were even remotely perfect. Like, I don't know of a single human being who was like, those were the most perfect laws ever. I certainly had my criticisms of them. But in both cases, the EFF came out and said that basically those were the end of the internet. If those came to pass, if Earn It or COSA came to pass, the amount of free speech stifling would be off the charts. People's First Amendment would be immediately violated, and it would just be this massive problem. Now, the EFF is choosing a very different hill to die on, and it is an extremely confusing one. They are saying that if a child, and we're talking a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, goes on the internet, that child should not be stopped from looking at adult material, such as porn. This is literally the EFF stance here. And it's in response to age verification laws in a variety of different states. This exists in multiple states already. I know Louisiana has age verification laws, and Texas now does as well as quite a few other states. And the idea is basically simple. If a person is attempting to view or post or purchase age-restricted stuff on the internet, that the same rules and regulations would apply as if it was in the real world, right, is in meat space, right? So if you were to go down to a store in person, walk down to a store and purchase alcohol, tobacco, adult magazines, etc., you would have to prove your age to the person at checkout time. Right? You have to prove your age. And in fact, some stores, such as certain bars and other adult places, you have to prove your age simply to enter them at all, right? This has been a long-standing thing. This is not something that is overly controversial. It just is a way of keeping kids from getting access to a wide variety of age-restricted stuff. Alcohol, tobacco, certain types of drugs, adult media, all sorts of stuff. Well, the EFF is saying that doing this on the internet, right, requiring that someone show their ID to or some sort of proof of their age is a violation of free speech. They're actually going so far as to say that it is a complete violation of the First Amendment, which is insane. And they've attached all sorts of other weird, scary language to it. I'm going to read this article to you from the EFF entitled "EFF Urges Supreme Court to Reject Texas's Speech-Chilling Age Verification Law." I'm just going to read a few little bits of it here because it's fascinating. It's fascinating that this is the hill that the Electronic Frontier Foundation is choosing to die on. Quote, "A Texas age verification law will rob people of anonymity online, chill access to speech for privacy and security-minded internet users, and entirely block some adults from accessing constitutionally protected online content," the EFF argued in a brief filed with the Supreme Court last week. The EFF joined the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, filing a friend of the court brief urging the U.S. Supreme Court to grant review and ultimately overturn the Fifth Circuit's decision upholding the Texas law. Now, what is the Texas law? They go on to explain a little bit of that. Last year, the state of Texas passed House Bill 1181 in a misguided attempt to shield minors from certain online content. The law requires all Texas internet users, including adults, to complete invasive age verification procedures on every website that the state deems to be at least 1/3 composed of sexual material. Under the law, adult users must upload sensitive personal records such as a driver's license or other photo ID to access any content on these sites, including non-explicit content. After a federal district court put the law on hold for review, the Fifth Circuit Court reversed and let the law take effect. Oh my gosh. So they go on to say, for adults, this is true. Even if that speech constitutes sexual or explicit content, the government cannot burden adult internet users and force them to sacrifice their anonymity, privacy, and security simply to access lawful speech. That's the EFF's stance on that. Now, here's something that's fascinating about all this. They grossly overstate exactly what's happening. They're misleading people here. So do all internet users need to verify their age to use the internet? No, not at all. Not under this Texas law, not under any state law that I'm aware of that currently exists. Does that mean that if an adult wants to access age-restricted content, they have to prove their ID? Yes, just like in real life. Just like when they're not online, because the same laws apply when you're using the internet as when you're in real life space. Now, I do understand that many people like the idea that the internet needs to be a completely anonymous place, that they want to be anonymous, and that's fine. However, if that anonymity runs contrary to the laws of the land that they live in, well, then they've got a problem, because now businesses wanting to do business on the internet need to comply with the laws of the land, or they're gonna get in trouble, right? They're gonna get their high knees kicked by either private individuals coming after them and suing them, or by the government agencies themselves. So they've got to comply with the law of the land. The laws are pretty clear. You can't let children view this content. Now the EFF stance is that if a website, right, let's say a website or an online service of some kind provides adult content, that no age verification should be required. to view, to download, to purchase, etc., that content. That's the EFF's stance. They filed this with the court. I've read over everything that's been made publicly available, and they've made it very clear that's their stance. The strange thing to me here is that they're not coming out and saying, here's a better way to do age verification, right? They're coming out and saying age verification should not be done. You should allow little kids to look at porn. That is their stance. And people from the EFF might disagree with my characterization of them, to which I would reply to them, okay, well, tell me exactly in practical terms how you stop children, say a 12-year-old, from downloading or purchasing or viewing or even uploading age-restricted content to these online services. And the EFF has not done that. Now, there's the way this works is the individuals are not providing their personal information to the government. This is a misleading thing that the EFF is talking about here, and they talk about this somewhere in this, and their social media, like their Twitter posts, are just filled with this, where they're saying over and over again that this scary draconian law is going to force people to divulge personal sexual information to the United States government, right? And somehow there's some real bad stuff that's going to happen based on that. The problem is, none of that is true. What basically is happening is the governments, individual state governments, are saying that the corporations, the businesses, etc., that are the individuals that are running these adult-only websites need to do a good faith, good effort to do age verification, right? So they need to use a verifiable method of age verification, which there's a variety of for-profit and non-profit organizations doing age verifications using a variety of different mechanisms, ranging from showing photo ID and video chats to uploading documents and all sorts of things. Some of them are a little easier to do, some of them are a little harder to do, some of them are a little more strenuous, some of them are a little more lax. But the government has kind of given the thumbs up to a variety of different options. And these websites either need to do one themselves that complies with the government rules of doing good faith age verification to make sure kids aren't getting access to stuff that you need to be 18 or 21 to access. Or if they're not doing it themselves, they need to use one of the other systems that are out there in place. That's not necessarily the government doing it. That's not the government necessarily even collecting that data. If you look through the way the laws are organized and structured, it's more that the government can verify that data is valid with whoever is organizing it, in some sort of an audit scenario to make sure they're actually doing it. But by and large, they're not sending it back to the government. These are individual organizations doing the age verification. It's also not something that's done every time. So this is something that gets repeated by the EFF over and over again, that this is like having to show your ID to this website every single time you wanna go and access this material that's your First Amendment right. Okay. So we're talking about porn. Okay. We're talking about adult entertainment. For 99% of this is about adult entertainment. Yes, every time you access it, your account would have to be verified, but it doesn't have to happen every time. Once you've verified your account one time, the idea is you verify it with an online service, and then that's immediately tied to your account, and your account is flagged as verified, and so then you just have access all the time, right? This is pretty straightforward. This is pretty obvious. The EFF, though, is kind of lying about how this works, how invasive it is, how much data is being collected. They're really not telling the truth about any of this stuff in order to, I think, to scare people, right? They're trying to scare people into letting little kids look at porn on the internet. What a strange hill to die on. I fully appreciate if the EFF doesn't like the way these laws are structured and has complaints or recommendations about how they could be done better. That'd be great. I am all for doing things better, just like with various net neutrality legislation and rules, the Earn It Act, the Kids Online Safety Act. There's always improvements that could be made there. A lot of those laws are complicated. A lot of those laws are well-intentioned, but kind of do things in weird ways where there's bad side effects. This happens all the time because it's laws and it's humans, and it's done by committee and blah, blah, blah. It sucks. So great, if the EFF wants to come out and try to find a way to make it better, that's awesome, but that's not what they're doing. They're saying, don't make it better, make it not exist. Make age verification of children not a thing, right? It's fascinating to me that they're choosing this hill to die on. I want to just contrast this from where the EFF came from. This is an interview that existed that's up on EFF.org with John Barlow. Now, John Barlow is one of the John Barlow and Mitch Kapor are for all intents and purposes, the founders of the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This happened back in 1990, something like that. And I'm going to read a quote from John Barlow's section of this interview to give you a little insight into the creation of the EFF and how fundamentally different their current approach is. I found myself at sunset on a beautiful July day on the deck of a home overlooking Silicon Valley, participating in a good-natured but urgent gathering around the two founders of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The genesis of their alliance began with an arguably pointless act. Some person or persons, probably an employee of Apple Computer, liberated a piece of Macintosh operating code and sent it over the signature of New Prometheus League to a number of industry figures, including Lotus Development Corporation founder Mitch Kapor. Kapor was unimpressed by the gift, whose arrival on a floppy disk seemed unlikely to amount to anything more political or otherwise significant than an attempt to infect his computer with a virus. John Barlow, a journalist specializing in technology who is working on a book tentatively titled Everything We Know Is Wrong, did not receive a floppy disk from New Prometheus, but because he attended the 5th Hackers Conference in October of 1989, he received a visit from an agent of the FBI with regard to New Prometheus. Only Agent Baxter, the agent in charge, the agent he's referring to here, referred to it as New Prosthesis, and evinced a woefully inadequate grasp of the matter he was investigating. Quote, he referred to them as the New Prosthesis League, Barlow told the assembly to general laughter. He was looking for something called the ROM code, and he didn't know what a ROM chip was. He didn't know what code was. He didn't know whether it had been stolen or what exactly had happened or whatever it was. And I realized that what we were looking at there was a microcosm of the whole set of things that could now begin to happen with the government and with society and computers. And it was just a little pinpoint of future shock that was going to blow up into something big and ugly if we weren't very careful about how it got managed. So what he's talking about here, there was a moment in the late 1980s when some of the code from the Macintosh ROM files was leaked, was sent out to a variety of people. Some of the FBI agents thought he might have it, so they went to his house. However, the FBI agent didn't know what it was that he was actually looking for. He didn't know what the ROM chip was. He didn't know what software code even really was. He wasn't a computer guy, and this was the 1980s and early 90s. People were confused. People were confused about the cyber and the onlines and the computers and, oh my gosh, and the hackers. It was very terrifying. And it became very clear that someone needed to have an organization to educate these people, to educate the public, to educate lawmakers, law enforcement, these agencies, so they understood at least well enough what they were talking about. So when they made the rules and enforced the rules, it actually made some sense. And this was what was focused on throughout the majority of the EFF's life, is dealing with and representing, in some cases, individuals and corporations that ran afoul of the FBI, the Secret Service, other political agencies and organizations that were coming after them for things that they clearly didn't understand, right? And the EFF was pushing hard not to just protect people from just weird warrants and raids that didn't make any sense because the people didn't even know what they were looking for. There was times when the Secret Service or the FBI would raid a house because there was some suspected, theft of source code, and they would take printers and printer ribbon and stacks of paper and everything, and they just didn't even know what they were taking. So they would just take everything and they would try to figure it out later. But because they didn't have people on their staff that actually understood computers, they never figured it out later. This was a real problem in the 80s and 90s. And the EFF served a very real purpose. And so having them to educate these people, to advocate for laws, to advocate on behalf of people and corporations who were wronged by government legislations that simply didn't understand computers made sense. And then we go to here, to modern day, when the EFF isn't really doing that anymore. Because you never see the EFF out there explaining to people what software code is anymore, or how software is distributed, or how files can be sent, or how networks function. They're not doing that anymore because that's not something that's needed quite as much. That education has been done. So the EFF has pivoted their focus to something else. What's strange is their focus seems to be in two areas, and both of those areas are confusing and disturbing. The first is whatever law and legislation there is that they can cling to, that they can declare this is the end of the internet, right? Whatever that law is, whether it's problems with net neutrality or lack of net neutrality, Earn It, COSA, some of these ID verification laws, whatever it is, end of the internet, right? And they use that to do fundraising. They get people upset. They whip people into frenzies. They do speeches. They post a constant stream of social media posts and articles about how terrible everything is. And we're all going to die because of this law or that law, and the internet's going to go away. And sometimes they have a little bit of a point. Most of the time, it's all completely overblown, and oftentimes, I'd say almost more often than not, these posts and these articles are based on false premises. And I think that's a bit concerning. But what makes me even more disturbed isn't whipping people into a frenzy to do some fundraising. I get it. They've lost their reason for existing because people now understand what source code is and what floppies are and what encryption is. And there's nobody. The journalists, the government agencies don't need that education anymore. Well, while I think you, me, and everyone else would agree that they're still not that smart when it comes to it, they at least the basics are understood, and there's a million organizations, individuals, and corporations providing that new and constant education about cybery stuff, right? So the EFF just doesn't have that reason for existing anymore, so they've got to cause controversy to raise the funds. So I get that. But the arguing against protecting children, that's where it starts to get a little bit weird, because it seems to be a constant, steady stream of objections from the EFF saying that it's terrible if we try to protect kids online. If we try to protect kids from predators, that's bad. If we try and stop kids from accessing porn, that's bad. If we try and stop kids from buying booze online, that's bad. It seems like the EFF just really wants little kids to do adult things. They keep on arguing that little kids should not be stopped from doing adult things on the internet, even when in the real world, those little kids are stopped every which way from Sunday from doing those adult things, right? So if a kid can't go down to the grocery store and buy booze, can't go buy cigarettes, can't go buy girly mags, right? The kid is stopped from doing adult things. But the EFF is arguing rather consistently that little kids should not be stopped from doing that on the internet. Now, many people would say, well, the internet shouldn't have those rules. Parents should just do a good job and stop kids from doing that. Parents should just do their job and take care of their kids so their kids aren't getting access to that stuff. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But that same logic would apply to the real world, right? So you could say, well, there shouldn't be laws stopping kids from buying a fifth of whiskey and a shotgun and a bunch of porn down at the store. Kids should be allowed to do that. If a 3-year-old wants to do that and has the cash, they should be allowed to do that because parents should be stopping them. If they're doing that, it's because the parent let them. That parent should do it, right? That's the argument that's being made right now is that the internet should be just completely lawless, right? And the laws that exist in the real world should not apply on the internet when those laws deal with children. Because when you look through what the EFF pushes, they regularly talk about the laws that exist outside of the internet and how those should apply to the internet. But never when it involves children. As soon as it involves children, they don't want there to be laws protecting children. It's the Kids Online Safety Act, and now with this ID verification stuff. And they make up completely phony baloney reasons of why these laws must go away, why there should be no protection of children, which does multiple disservices. Not only does that mean, well, that makes the internet less of a safe place for kids, which is a problem. It also makes the internet less of a good place to do business because then the laws are murky. The laws are different between the internet and meat space, so that causes some significant problems legally for a number of businesses. So they're going to have some trouble all by itself. But where was I even going with this? I got myself all worked up into a tizzy. Suffice to say, rewind, brain reset. Suffice to say, the EFF is pushing for kids being allowed to access adult material. That's what they're pushing for. Now, I'm sure after they watch this, which they will, if they respond at all, which they probably won't, the basic response will be twofold. One, it will be what I said earlier. Well, the parents should really be doing the parenting and stopping them, and otherwise it violates our First Amendment rights to look at porn without proving that we're an adult. That's not really a First Amendment right. You don't have a First Amendment right to look at adult material without proving you're an adult. That's not a thing. I'm sorry, that's not a thing. But second, they are going to say flat out that they are not advocating for little kids to look at adult material, right? All they're advocating for is stopping people who are trying to stop little kids from looking at adult material. You see that? So they're not advocating that little kids should look at adult material. They're just saying that nobody should stop them. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's a little bit ridiculous. That's a ridiculous defense to make, and that's one of the only defenses that they've got here. Now, I'm not saying that the EFF is a bunch of pedophiles. However, they don't want anyone to stop little kids from looking at adult material or going to adult websites or talking online with adults in private anonymously. I'm just saying this is what the EFF wants. And when these organizations say what they want, I believe them. Say what you will about this. Argue with me about the legislation. That's fine. Like I've said, none of the legislations that I've mentioned are perfect. None are. I have critiques about all of them. However, the way the EFF is approaching them is to nuke them all from orbit in order to make sure that kids can see porn. That's weird. That's a really weird hill to die on. And the EFF has come so far and strayed so far afield of their original mission, it's utterly preposterous. They are not the organization that they used to be. They are not at all the Electronic Frontier Foundation that we knew and that we loved and that I personally donated to. They are not the same. Thank you to everyone who subscribes to the Lunduke Journal and makes all of this possible. You can go to lunduke.com, which has just links everywhere. You can find links to the podcast RSS feed and some of the videos and a bunch of the articles, all sorts of good stuff. Or you can go straight to lunduke.locals.com, where you can find all of the articles and videos as they come out with no commercials of any kind. It's absolutely fantastic, and you can subscribe there. Pitch in a couple of dollars, pitch in more than a couple of dollars. I won't object. And you keep the lights on here and keep things completely free of any influence from big tech. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.